Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, the authorized biography of Srila Prabhupada. This is volume 6, entitled Uniting Two Worlds, Around the World and Return to Vrindavan. This is 1975 to 1977. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta is written by Satsvarup Das Goswami for the BBC. This chapter, chapter 1, is entitled Please Distribute Books. This is San Francisco, July 5th, 1970. Srila Prabhupada was attending the 1970 Ratha Yatra in San Francisco. The day was cold and windy, and about 10,000 people had joined in Lord Jagannath's procession through Golden Gate Park. Srila Prabhupada had danced in the street with thousands of participants during the parade. He addressed a large crowd in an auditorium by the beach and looked on as his disciples had distributed a free vegetarian prasadam feast to thousands. But when a devotee arrived with half a dozen advance copies of Volume 1 of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada appeared especially pleased. Surrounded by devotees and curious festival goers, Srila Prabhupada held one of the books, admiring the front cover with its full color picture of Radha and Krishna. The volume was big, almost 7.5 by 10.5 inches, and its dust cover shone silver with bright red letters, Krishna. It was a transcendental wonder in Srila Prabhupada's reverent hands. Onlookers could barely restrain themselves from pressing in against Srila Prabhupada to peer over his shoulders, and they didn't restrain their exclamations when Prabhupada smiled and opened the volume. He examined the illustrations, the print, the paper, and the binding. "Very nice," he said. He fixed his attention on a page, reading. Then he looked up and announced that this greatly valuable book, Krishna, had just arrived and that everyone should read it. Holding one book in his hand, with the other copies stacked before him, he said that anyone who so desired should come forward and buy a copy. People began clamoring, and hands with $10 bills thrust forward, while voices cried out, begging for a copy. And Prabhupada promptly sold every book, not even keeping one for himself. This describes the very interesting and joyful occasion of the arrival of Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book. Srila Prabhupada translated the Bhagavatam and summarized the Bhagavatam, especially the 10th canto, in the form of a summary study called Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At this time, this was 1970, the BBC hadn't even been officially formed at that time. It was still operating as ISKCON Press. And I think it was Brahmananda Swami had just arrived from Tokyo, with the first copies of Prabhupada's newly published book, Krishna. And how nice that it arrived during the Ratha Yatra festival. Ratha Yatras are already such special, joyful, celebratory occasions. And here it became all the more so because Prabhupada received the first advance copies of his book. So at that time, obviously books were being published and the advance copies would come to the author for them to look at. Prabhupada looked at them, as it said, he examined very carefully. He appreciated when his books were published and printed very nicely. And he personally distributed the first copies of them. Imagine those people who got from Prabhupada's own hand a copy of Krishna book, the first 12 or so copies ever printed in history. And interestingly enough, Prabhupada, just having authored the books, never even kept a copy for himself of his own book that he just received advance copies of. He distributed each and every one of them to the crowd. He was obviously pleased with that, And Prabhupada was always pleased with his books being published, translated, and especially distributed, and even more so, read and appreciated by the devotees. So the devotees appreciated this incident. It continues. Brahmananda had been astounded to see Srila Prabhupada give away his only copy of the book. Having helped publish the book, Brahmananda knew how painstakingly Prabhupada had written it, and how he had anxiously waited 1 year for the book to finally see print. Yet, once it arrived, he immediately gave it all away, and to a disciple who was not even in good standing. Brahmananda told how in 1967, Prabhupada had given away his advance copy of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya in his room at 26 2nd Avenue in New York City. Just before that book had arrived, Srila Prabhupada had been sitting and talking with Satyavrat, a disciple who had previously stopped coming to the temple due to petty quarreling with his godbrothers. When the copy of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya had arrived, Prabhupada had lovingly inspected it and then offered it to Satyavrat as a gift. The Prabhupada Lilamrta is one of the important books in ISKCON. It's in one sense we can say it's most important for us as devotees of ISKCON to read this book, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta. It doesn't really deal with philosophy as much as other books of Srila Prabhupada's like Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. But there are two things. There's Bhagavan, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and there's his devotee, the Bhagavat. Bhagavan and Bhagavat always go together. And other books of Srila Prabhupada's describes philosophical Krishna consciousness and Krishna's pastimes. But this book is important because it describes Srila Prabhupada's pastimes, and therefore it's called Lilamrta. It's especially important for us because as members of ISKCON, we should know what Prabhupada did, what he said about specific things, and how we should be doing things in ISKCON. ISKCON is a Gaudiya Vaishnava institution, and there are others, but ISKCON has its particular moods and flavors because it completely emanates and encompasses Srila Prabhupada's mood, Srila Prabhupada's way of doing Krishna consciousness specifically. And we, as his followers, need to understand that mood, that instructions of his, and then continue ISKCON in that specific way. So we as devotees can find out how Prabhupada did things on a daily basis, what he told his disciples, how he carried out his daily activities. And just the other day there was this quote from His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Swami, who said that we can learn a lot from Srila Prabhupada's pastimes, because Srila Prabhupada's pastimes are Krishna consciousness in action. And we can see very practically how Krishna consciousness should be done, like a practical training guide. Prabhupada has different aspects to his personality also. There's the very gentle, grandfatherly side of Srila Prabhupada, and there's also the other side where he pressurized devotees to push on Krishna consciousness, pressurized devotees to be Krishna conscious in their daily behavior. And we should embrace both sides, both aspects of Srila Prabhupada's. Even with Krishna, it's said that Krishna is as gentle or as soft as a rose and as hard as a thunderbolt. But we should appreciate both sides of Krishna's. He is reciprocating with the devotees and he's killing the demons. Similarly with Srila Prabhupada, we have to appreciate all aspects of Prabhupada's. His very soft side where he gives laddus to the devotees, and where he chastises the devotees, how to do specific things. We will read a pastime shortly on how Prabhupada put a great deal of pressure on devotees, especially in terms of publishing his books. Okay, so this is now mid-71. The temples were selling hundreds of the Krishna books. per week. Karandhar, one of Prabhupada's book fund manager, began sending Sankirtan newsletters to the North American temples and to Srila Prabhupada. By listing the monthly results of each temple's book distribution, the newsletters incited competition. It says, recently in an all-out program to sell books, the San Francisco temple, having been averaging 20 Krishna books per day of distribution. What is their technique? They say, simply we make it our priority activity. All you have to do is want to do it, and then try as hard as you can. Everywhere we go, we carry BTGs and Krishna books, he says. On street, door to door, to the laundromat, to the store, everywhere. We have been taxing our brains in so many fancy and complicated ways to try to increase sales. But as it has been increasing, nothing is more successful than simply taking the books personally, in hand, going door to door with this causeless mercy. Just consider how many hours a day we spend specifically trying to distribute Prabhupada's literature, which is the dearmost thing to him. Prabhupada says in response, he wrote a letter, I am very pleased to hear that you are increasing in your distribution of our books and magazines. This is a good sign that your preaching work is also strong. The more you increase your strength in preaching, the more you will go on selling books. I want especially that my books be distributed widely. It is not surprising to devotees that Prabhupada wanted his books distributed. Of course, he wrote so many copies, so many different volumes of books, and it's, I think, to any devotee and probably everyone, it's more than obvious that he wanted us to read it ourselves and get everyone to get a share of that copy. Why are books so important? Why are they so heavily stressed on? ISKCON is an educational movement. It is educating the world on how to be a devotee of Krishna. And of course, books are important in an educational movement. We know that Prabhupada himself used to write his monthly newspaper articles back in the late 40s, and that's how he began the BTG, Back to Godhead magazine. And at some point, a librarian told him that it's better that he write them as books rather than newspapers, because they would be better respected and kept. They add more weight and authority to the teachings. So Prabhupada took that as a signal. It had encompassed the instructions that he received from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta over so many occasions to print books, distribute books. And Srila Prabhupada continued that by painstakingly writing on a daily basis. This describes how the Christmas marathon began. It was on December 22nd, 1972, that we accidentally discovered the Christmas marathon in Los Angeles. Of course, we noticed a great increase in the number of people going into the stores, and the stores were staying open sometimes until midnight. Rameshwar Prabhu says, I was standing in front of a Burbank Zodi's. We were having an intense competition with prizes in Los Angeles, and it was building up to a feverish pitch. So after distributing books madly all day long, I had collected about $350 and had distributed 650 magazines. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was convinced that this was the new world record in ISKCON, and that nobody was possibly going to beat me that day. Even though the store was open till 12, business had started slowing off, and I was thinking, maybe I should go back. Undoubtedly, everyone is back already. No one has stayed out past 8 o'clock. Finally, I arrived at the temple about 10 minutes to 12 and burst into the Sankirtan room. But the only person there was the secretary, Madhukanta. Everyone else was still out on book distribution, even past midnight. And this is how the devotees accidentally started a Christmas marathon. Talking of which, in a month's time, the annual Christmas marathon would begin. Now it has become an annual thing since this day where the devotees stumbled upon it, that around Christmas, the month is dedicated to distributing Prabhupada's books. 650 magazines on one day. Anyone has records to outdo that? In fact, since these days, the most books were distributed around this time in ISKCON history. I remember looking at the Sandton newsletter once, and it was like in some millions of copies of books were distributed at this time, this period of time. And Prabhupada writes a letter to Rameshwar, the devotee who was just describing this incident. Prabhupada writes to him, "My dear Rameshwar, I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated December 27, 1972, and with great happiness I have read your figures of amount of books sold during the 3-day period, December 22nd to 24th, 1972. It is scarcely believable that more than 17,000 books could have been sold by one temple in 3 days. That indicates to me that people are at least becoming a little serious about this Krishna consciousness movement in your country. Otherwise, why should they buy our books? But they can see that our boys and girls, devotees, are so much sincere and serious to distribute the message of Krishna consciousness. They are at once struck by seeing them, and therefore they appreciate and purchase. This is unique in the world. So I am so much pleased upon all of the boys and girls in Los Angeles and all over the world who are understanding and appreciating this unique quality of our transcendental literature. And voluntarily they are going out to distribute despite all circumstances of difficulty. By this effort alone, they are assured to go back to home, back to Godhead." I'll repeat that last sentence. By this effort alone, they are assured to go back to home, back to Godhead. The devotees in that one temple distributed 17,000 books. That is, as Prabhupada says, that is scarcely believable. And in the US where this was happening, it's winter. December, Christmas is winter. And probably Christmas is the coldest period of the entire winter. And yet devotees can make such a sacrifice. That just shows how much devotees love Krishna, how much devotees love Srila Prabhupada. For us here, December it's warm and even hot. It's pleasant weather. We don't need to go out in the snow. But I don't think that yet we've done this number of distributing books of Srila Prabhupada's. But we can always change that. This year we can change that. 17,000. We can start planning now. You have a month to plan. At the same time, a lot of books were being distributed all over. And this one student received a book. In fact, he was pressurized to buy a book. And a lot of people in those days were pressurized to buy books. Some of them got upset about it. And ISKCON received a lot of letters from upset people that they were forced to buy books. Fortunately, this person wasn't too upset. Okay, so Rameshwar again, he did this in 1973. So this person writes a letter to ISKCON in response to receiving a book. He says, "Sir, a couple of weeks ago, devotees of Krishna from Denver were here at the University of Arkansas distributing literature. One young man approached me with a hard pitch for my purchasing a copy of the Prabhupada translation of the Bhagavad Gita. I was initially quite skeptical. So many people are getting rich from selling their versions of the answer. And I told him not to bother me. He insisted though, and finally I gave in. I have been reading the Gita, having not finished it yet, and have found it quite rewarding. My mind, shaped in logic and empiricism, seems to find itself barely tasting the transcendental material in the book. I discuss it with others. I find myself remembering certain passages. It has genuinely stimulated my interest, to say the least, in a way that my extensive readings in Christianity, Zen Buddhism, and the other forms of yoga have never succeeded in doing. In short, I think I have finally found the beginning. Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. So at least in that case, there was a happy ending. I'm sure they didn't include the letters where people were upset in the Lilamrta. But no doubt, Prabhupada still emphasized that it is still our duty to upset them and agitate them, distribute books to them. Of course, book distribution has evolved now, where it's done with a lot more sensitivity and a lot less also. But yeah, people were upset, but this guy, unfortunately, was quite happy. There's a beautiful description of Prabhupada's pastimes, I think. Where is this? Srila Prabhupada liked to sit in his garden with its roses, jasmine, azaleas, honeysuckle, mint, silver lace vine, marigolds, and banana trees. And he liked the sound of the fountain. The small compound, with its lawn, flowers, bushes, and seat for Srila Prabhupada, was surrounded by high cinder block walls. When Prabhupada received special guests, the devotees would bring chairs for them. But Prabhupada's disciples would always sit on thin mats on the lawn and look up at Srila Prabhupada on his elevated seat. The neighborhood was quieter and more peaceful in the evening, and Prabhupada could hear the kirtan in the temple room and the cars passing along Venice Boulevard. For an hour or more, Prabhupada would sit listening to a reading from the Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, while around him on the grass, sharing the transcendental moment, sat his disciples. Prabhupada was fully satisfied to hear Krishna Leela, and he would sit head held high in a meditative mood. It was only an informal group, but his presence made the occasion very special, momentous. From time to time, he would interrupt the reader to comment. Night would fall, and he would end the reading and leave the garden. So imagine the devotee's fortune to sit with Prabhupada in his garden and hear Prabhupada's books in his personal presence and see how much Prabhupada appreciated Krishna's pastimes, that he would listen to the devotees read his books. Sometimes devotees may be surprised that Prabhupada read or listened to his own books, but Srila Prabhupada himself said that the books, it's not exactly his writing in that sense. These books have been dictated to him by Krishna. So Prabhupada, listening to them, is listening to Krishna speak and listening to Krishna's message. We find a similar, Prabhupada is saying that Krishna is speaking the books to him and he is writing. We find a similar instance in history some hundreds of years ago. There was the great devotee Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur some hundreds of years ago. He was challenged at that time by a group in South India called the Ramanandis. They are a branch of the Sri Sampradaya in South India. And they challenged Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya that we don't have a commentary of the Vedanta Sutra. Every other disciplic succession has a commentary on it, but we don't in those days. And then their response was that, why should they have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra when we have Srimad Bhagavatam, which is written by the same author who wrote Vedanta Sutra? In other words, Srila Vyasadeva. So usually a commentary is given where the book itself may need some elaboration. Like say if I write a book and something may not be clear, then you can say that this is actually what he meant, in a certain passage. But why should we do that when Srila Vyasadeva has given his own explanation in the form of the Bhagavatam? So anyway, we never had a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And the disciplic succession, the Brahma, Madhava, Gaudiya Sampradaya, was under attack because of not having that literature available. So at that time, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur had to respond to these allegations. But he was very old. And his disciple, Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan, he said he'll respond to them with the blessings of his spiritual master. And so he did. He traveled to South India. Oh no, I think it was in Jaipur. And there was the deity of Govinda. And he prayed to the deity of Govinda, please please give me a commentary. Please give me the answer to the attacks that we are faced with. And so, at some point, the deity Govinda personally spoke the commentary to Baladev Vidyabhushan, and he simply transcribed it. And then he presented the commentary, which he called Govinda Bhasya. In other words, the speech of Govinda, the deity Govinda. And he presented that to the Ramanandis, and he completely defeated their allegations, saved the Sampradaya, and also some of those very same Ramanandis converted and became disciples of Baladev Vidyabhushan. And therefore we see Prabhupada offers his Bhagavad Gita as it is. He dedicates it to Baladev Vidyabhushan, who so nicely presented the Govinda Bhasya commentary. So that is why Prabhupada dedicates it to him. And in the same way, Prabhupada, apart from his own spiritual intelligence and qualifications, he is directly inspired by Krishna to write the purports. In the evenings, Prabhupada would have, sometimes in midday, sometimes in evenings, Prabhupada would have his massage, and devotees could personally come around Prabhupada and speak to him, discuss things with him. I was suggesting the other day, if Nandakumar Prabhu agrees, we could have some kind of program like that with Prabhupada, where we, take him outside, have some, like these sort of, intimate gatherings with Prabhupada, massage him, read his letters, or hear his lectures, and with Prabhupada. That would be so wonderful. The last thing I want to read is a section which I was telling you where Prabhupada put great pressure on the devotees. I have to read this because in this section, this is one of the most famous pastimes in ISKCON history. Okay, there's a specific term they give this, the great something. Okay, so it says, Srila Prabhupada recovered his health, and by the end of 1974, his BBT was also in extraordinary health, with the temples again competing in a furious Christmas marathon. In America, the BBT reported to Prabhupada that approximately 387,000 hardbound books had been sold during the year, a 67% increase over the previous year, and almost 4 million Back to Godheads had been sold, an 89% increase. The American BBT sold the individual temples a total of 6,668,000 pieces of literature, a 60% increase. Such news made Srila Prabhupada become energetic like a young man, and Prabhupada and his book distribution movement headed into 1975 with all signs of increasing, doubling, and tripling the already astounding figures of 1974. So at that time, Prabhupada was a little bit ill, and the news of the book scores made Prabhupada feel much better. Imagine 6,668,000 pieces of literature in 1 year. You can, the whole of the US should be devotees, or will be devotees at some point. Okay, and now this comes the great rush. Srila Prabhupada had created his Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in 1972. The BBT would operate exclusively for the benefit of ISKCON. The trust document stated that the trustees should divide the money from the sale of books to ISKCON temples in 2 funds, one for printing books and one for purchasing ISKCON properties and building temples. So at this point, Prabhupada had translated some of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, but not all of it had been published. At that time, the BBT was relocating and was on a bit of a go slow. They were manuscripts Prabhupada had translated just waiting to be published. And devotees were complaining. They wanted to read Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita. In those days, devotees, as they got copies of Prabhupada's books, like say the Madhya Leela, certain copy came out, devotees would read that immediately and wait for the next book to come out. Like, imagine in those days, not all Prabhupada's books were available like they are today. We don't have to wait for the books to come out. We just have to read them. In those days, devotees had to wait for them. So, what we're waiting for, I don't know. But definitely I know that most of us have not read all of them, even though we probably have all the copies of them. I know, I certainly haven't. And these devotees, they would be so happy to receive a copy. So, this is where the great thing happened. In Los Angeles, Rameshwar had only completed the last lease for the new building press. The BBT artists had just arrived. Editors, proofreaders, and other production workers would soon be coming. By the time Prabhupada reached Hawaii in May, the press in Los Angeles was preparing for operation. Rameshwar and Radha Vallabha had investigated the necessities and the difficulties in presenting and printing the Chaitanya Charitamrita. One of the main problems they discovered was the lack of an expert Bengali editor. Never before had the BBT lagged so far behind in Srila Prabhupada's publications. Radha, Vallabha and Rameshwar were straining their brains to produce books quickly and efficiently, and they devised a stepped-up production schedule. By the old schedule, they could publish one book every 3 or 4 months, but on the new schedule, they decided that they could produce one book per month, so they were increasing it by 4 times. In that way, they would eventually catch up with Srila Prabhupada. Rameshwar was eager to present to Prabhupada this plan when he came to Los Angeles. On January 20th, 1975, when Prabhupada arrived in Los Angeles, he was welcomed and accompanied by leading sannyasis. And Prabhupada said, "I have no personal qualification, but I am simply trying to satisfy my Guru, that is all. My Guru Maharaj has asked me, if you get some money, you print books." So there was a private meeting, Prabhupada says. Some of my important godbrothers were also there. It was Radha Kund. So my Guru Maharaj was speaking to me that since we have got this Bagh Bazaar marble temple, there has been so much dissension. Everyone is simply thinking, who will occupy this room or that room? I wish, therefore, sell this temple, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is saying. Sell this temple, sell the marble, and print some books. So Prabhupada says, yes, I took up that offer from his mouth. He is very fond of books, and he told me personally, if you get some money, print books. Therefore I am stressing on this point. Where is the book? Where is book? So kindly help me. This is my request. Print as many books as possible, in as many languages as possible, and distribute them throughout the whole world. Then the Krishna consciousness movement will automatically increase. So the next morning, while walking on Venice Beach, Prabhupada delivered an extraordinary ultimatum. Surrounded by devotees, he walked along, poking the sand softly with his cane. Prabhupada says, these 17 volumes are unpublished. This is a great problem for our movement. Yes, Prabhupada, Rameshwar responded, attentive and concerned. The other devotees were also nodding. Something must be done. Yes, Prabhupada. So Prabhupada continued, yes, they must be published immediately. Yes, Srila Prabhupada, the devotees agreed. Prabhupada says, so I think they can be printed in 2 months. Rameshwar wasn't sure that he had heard correctly. The press had only just opened. The artists didn't even have the lights in their room. 2 months was illogical, impossible. Now was the moment to tell Prabhupada that the plan, that they already had an increased production plan. Srila Prabhupada, he began, we've been meeting about this and the press is finally here and established. I think we can increase the production 4 times. We think that now we can go from producing 1 book every 4 months to producing one of your books per month. One book every month, Prabhupada said. That means over 1 year. That is not enough. The devotees looked over at Rameshwar and Radha Vallabha. Prabhupada says, you have to do all the books in 2 months' time. This time they had heard clearly. Rameshwar told Prabhupada, I think that is impossible. Maybe we can go faster. Then Prabhupada says, impossible is a word found in the Fool's Dictionary. Suddenly Rameshwar realized that his spiritual life was on the line. To say impossible now would mean he had no faith in Krishna's representative, no faith in the power of God. He must throw away his material estimations and rational common sense. While Rameshwar and Radha Vallabha stood there speechless, Srila Prabhupada continued walking accompanied by the others. The two devotees hurried to catch up, but now everyone looked at them as if to say, come on, stop doubting, you have to do it. Rameshwar asked Prabhupada if he could discuss this with the other devotees and then report back. Oh yes, Prabhupada replied, whatever is required. Rameshwar and Radha Vallabha dropped back while Prabhupada and the others continued down the beach. This was probably the most pressure Prabhupada ever placed on devotees in ISKCON, to publish all, 12 or 17 volumes in just 1 month. Previously they were doing 1 book in 4 months, now they were going to do 1 book a month, and now they were just given the instruction that they must do 12 books in 2 months. So that created great chaos. And just look at their intelligence in trying to serve the order of their spiritual master. They made a plan to do it. They got all the editors in ISKCON to that center. They got all the artists in ISKCON to that center. They got all the devotees who could do anything with book production. And they got them all in one temple. They washed their clothes. They gave them prasad. They didn't have to do anything else other than their book production. In other words, while one devotee was painting a painting, the other was sleeping. When he woke up, this devotee went to sleep. When he needed prasad, someone brought him prasad. Someone probably fed him the prasad also while he was editing and transcribing and translating. Devotees learnt Bengali just because they had to use it in Prabhupada's service. So they made an expert plan. They did whatever they had to do. You know, every book of Prabhupada's has one color section full of paintings. Devotees had to paint that. They couldn't download them from Krishna.com. They had to paint those paintings. And that doesn't take, it's not an overnight job, but devotees did it. And they finally published all the volumes in 2 months. Hari Bol, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. What does this show us? That if we try to attempt the even impossible instructions of the spiritual master, then his mercy is invested in those very same instructions, and one gets the power, the potency, the empowerment to somehow fulfill those instructions. Every one of us, I hope, has had the opportunity to get some really ridiculous seeming instruction to do some service that seems impossible, and having been put in a position to depend on the devotees, on the spiritual master's mercy, had the opportunity to execute that service successfully. And devotees have done such great things. And no doubt, this temple is a great example of that, of how great things can be done in short periods of time with great efforts. His Grace Nandakumar Prabhu Ki Jai. So this is coming to the end of it. I was supposed to have done this other chapter, but guess what? We didn't. There's maybe 1 or 2 things I'll just point out so that I don't get into trouble. There's this very nice, there's one very nice pastime on an aircraft, July 15th, 1975. Prabhupada had a direct flight from Philadelphia to San Francisco. He and Upendra sat in the first class section, while Brahmananda, Harikesh, and Pradyumna traveled in economy class. Vishaka Devi Dasi had also come to photograph Srila Prabhupada. After the plane had reached cruising altitude, a uniformed gentleman emerged from the cabin. Immediately he caught sight of Srila Prabhupada sitting by the window and walked over. When he leant over and asked Prabhupada how he was, Prabhupada saw the man and wanted to talk. So he asked Upendra to get up and let the gentleman have his seat. "You are the captain," Prabhupada surmised. "No," the man replied, "I am the flight supervisor, and I am here to overlook the pilot and the crew. Would it be all right if I asked you a philosophical question?" Prabhupada nodded and was pleased. The man asked, "Is everything created by God?" Prabhupada said yes, and he quoted the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadhyasya Yataha. Everything in existence, Prabhupada said, has its origin in God. Then the man asked, "What is evil? Is evil also God's creation?" Prabhupada explained, "For God there is no good nor evil. Everything is good. Goodness is God's frontage and evil is God's back portion. Using this example, the chest or the back are both equal. It is not that when one has some pain in the back that we don't care for it, or simply taking front of the chest. No, although it is the back, we still see it as important as the front." So the man asks, "Is good and evil of the same importance?" "No, for God there is nothing evil. Just like for the sun there is no darkness. But for us there is light and darkness. If you keep your back to the sun, you will find darkness. And if you face the sun, then there is no darkness. We create darkness as soon as we change our position. Instead of remaining in front of God, we keep God on the back. Then there is darkness. Otherwise there is no question of darkness. But in the sun, as it is, there is no such darkness. Therefore, God is all good. But for us, when we forget God, that is evil. And when we are in God consciousness always, then everything is good. Is that all right?" The man seemed to understand and respectfully accepted the answer. He was about to ask another question when a well-dressed but somewhat drunken passenger had come up to them and spoke. Srila Prabhupada looked up at the man and asked, "Are you afraid of death?" The intoxicated man stammered, sobered up, and walked away. The flight supervisor continued again. "Can you tell me how one can become peaceful?" he asked. Prabhupada answered by quoting Bhagavad Gita, "Bhoktaram Jagyatapasam," and he signaled to Vishaka for a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. When no one had a Bhagavad Gita with them, when Prabhupada heard this, he became angry. He then explained to the man that one had to have knowledge of God as the supreme controller, the supreme enjoyer, and the best friend of everyone. Only then could one have peace. So isn't this a brilliant answer Srila Prabhupada has given the man? That evil is only the absence of God consciousness. But from God's perspective, from Krishna's perspective, there is no difference between good and evil. Like sometimes Prabhupada gave the example, electricity, comes through your power lines, but in your house you may convert it on the stove to heat and in the fridge to cold. But from the powerhouse's perspective, there is no difference between the electricity. It's the same electricity that you use. So similarly, everything is God's energy, Krishna's energy, and according to how we situate ourselves, we may see it as good or evil. And according to what we do in relation to positioning ourselves according to Krishna, we may see something as good, something as evil. But from Krishna's perspective, everything is good, because everything is his energy. And when we realize that and accept him as Bhoktaram Jagatapasam, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam, then we get all peace and prosperity. Those three things Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. Accept him as the supreme authority and owner of everything, the enjoyer of everything, and the supreme friend of everyone. When we do that, then that is known as the peace formula. One can achieve all peace. Shantim Richatim. I think we'll end there. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Does anyone have any questions? Oh yeah, I have questions for you also. But does anyone have any questions before we move on? So we have our prizes for the most attentive candidates. Yes, Mataji? Yes, okay. Okay. Yes. Right. How do you account for the fact that when Vishnu was asleep, then those two demons came out to his parents? Okay, good questions. The first question I just want to clarify, you mean the Gaudiya Math or the Gaudiya Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya? Which, are you asking about like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's movement or the disciplic succession? Okay, so that's, okay, so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's movement that he started was called the Gaudiya Math. Gaudiya referring to Bengal, and Math means like a temple or an ashram. So that was founded by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, like Prabhupada founded ISKCON. The Gaudiya Math was founded by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. That would have been sometime like in the 1920s or something like that. I don't know exactly when it was formed. But yeah, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta formed that. And then since then, it's been existing. There are still Gaudiya Maths in Mayapur, Mayapur area. Yeah. So, you know, Prabhupada himself would have participated in the Gaudiya Maths in those days. And then when they became relatively inactive, that's when he came to the West and began ISKCON. Your second question, good question. Krishna cannot create anything that's evil. And anyone even who approaches Krishna cannot be evil because they are approaching Krishna. Like even if someone prays to Krishna for something evil, they are approaching Krishna, so even their prayer will be transformed to something good. You're talking about there's one pastime where from the wax from the ears of Lord Vishnu, two demons grew out of that, Madhu and Kaitava. So how can such a thing happen? How can from the own body of the Lord something so-called evil be established? That's a very good question. I would say that it isn't possible for something evil to actually be produced by the Lord. Everything the Lord produces is beautiful, good, but sometimes He may allow something to be created that may solve a specific problem or a specific need in the universe, that through that agency something may be achieved. Like, you can ask, how is it that Krishna encouraged Arjuna to kill everyone on the battlefield? Or how is it even that there is such a thing as death? Death seems so cruel, old age. But these things are there by the Lord in terms of like the rules and regulations of the universe, how the universe operates, to keep life progressive, to keep the universe progressive. So sometimes with these demons, they only really give the Lord an opportunity to exhibit a certain pastime, or for them to execute something and then be also obliterated by the Lord's mercy, and then those same demons also become liberated through that process. Also, these pastimes show us that nothing that exists isn't without the Lord's supervision, and nothing can like overtake the Lord. There's no idea like there's this, like a Satan that's like a competitor to God. There's so many demons in the history of the Vedas, but the Lord or His incarnations kill all of them, and they themselves become liberated through that. Like there's that one pastime with Muchukunda in the Bhagavatam. Muchukunda was that king, and he got that benediction not to be woken up and whoever woke him up will be burnt to ashes. And so the Lord arranged for, who was it that got burnt to ashes by? Incidentally, the Lord arranged, someone went to wake him up thinking that it was, and he burnt that person. So it was like a, sort of, it was that demon got obliterated through the Lord's devotees' agency. Yeah, that's my contribution. I don't know if there's probably any, nothing. Right, so I have to give you these gifts, Dinesvara, you have them? So I have to ask you 5 questions based on the class. The first one is, well actually, based on Lilamrta, we'll make it a little broader. I'll ask you these things because I think they're important things to know. What was the address of the house where Prabhupada grew up as a child? What was Prabhupada's address? In... Okay, at least the street name. What? No, not in Ravonia. Sorry. I didn't hear. What was the answer? No. But that... Okay, that's where Prabhupada started ISKCON. Give him a badge. Oh yeah, I have mine here also. Dinesvara gave me a prize earlier. Okay, so anyone knows the address? We should know this. 151 Harrison Road. Okay, next question. What was the book that Prabhupada received at the Ratha Yatra? Prabhupada, yes, Prabhupada? Krishna book. Prabhupada had his hand up. You have to put your hands up so that we... let's see. Who was the devotee that got all of that, pressure from Prabhupada to, yes? Okay, Rameshwar, Balaram. That's 3 so far. More questions, No questions. I can't think of any more questions. What did I speak? Okay, what was the address of the first temple in ISKCON? Mataji. Okay, great. Hare Krishna. One more. I can't remember what I was speaking of. Which volume of the Lilamrta did we read today? 6th volume, but you know that. You're arranging the classes. Prabhu, you're cheating, Prabhu. Oh yeah, but Jayananda Prabhu answered it, but... Oh, okay. Keshava goes to that. Is that all? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.